It's kind of like if you ask a geodetic surveyor when does he use the math for the curvature, they know it, but they've never used it. It's one of those things they're taught, but they've never actually used it.
To recap, if it is the telescope that is moving, then when it is filled with water, it has to be tipped further to see the star. If the telescope is stationary and the starlight drifting past us, then it does not have to be tipped further. In 1871, George Biddle Airy, the Astronomer Royal, performed this experiment. This is a copy from his original report. You can see that the two readings are virtually identical. If it had been the telescope that was moving, Airy expected a figure of 30 seconds of arc. In fact, he only managed to read 0.8 seconds of arc difference. Bradley first discovered stellar aberration, and it is interesting that in his report Airy mentions that it was now about 100 seconds of arc and that it was still slowly diminishing. This indicates that the speed of light was still decreasing in measurable amounts when Airy performed his experiment in 1871. Bradley first discovered stellar aberration, and it is interesting that in his report Airy the result of Airy's experiment, known as Airy's failure, was that the telescope does not have to be tipped further. This proved that it was the incoming light that was moving past a stationary telescope fixed to the stationary Earth. What is interesting in his very brief report of only 4 pages is that not once did he refer to the astonishing results that the experiment proved. That the Earth was stationary. That the Earth was stationary. This experiment was also dismissed by Wikipedia, which said, "Ether drag test," under the main article, "Luminiferous Ether." By means of a water-filled telescope, Airy in 1871 looked for a change in stellar aberration through the refracting water due to an ether drag. Like in all other ether drift experiments, he obtained a negative result. This is a gross distortion of the truth. That he did not have to change the angle proved that it was the ether drifting past the stationary surface of the Earth.
Well, there you have it, everyone. Peer-reviewed, just what people want to see. So why is this ignored? Well, you know why this is ignored, because this definitely tells you that the Earth is not moving. In fact, no experiment ever has shown that the Earth moves.
Has there ever been an experiment done to prove that the Earth is revolving around the Sun?
Yes, there was several experiments in the 1800s. Dominique Arago, Armand Fuseau, Augustin Fresnel, but one of the most famous was the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1887.
Tell us about that.
Well, they used light beams to measure whether the Earth was moving, and they found that there was no movement. The Earth has to be moving 30 kilometers per second to complete its annual revolution. And they found out that it wasn't moving in a very precise. Michelson could have calculated it to 1/100th of what he got in his experiment. That's how sensitive his instruments were.
What did the experiment involve in terms of apparatus? So we can get a concrete understanding of what they found.
If the Earth is moving around the sun and we shoot that light beam in the direction that the Earth is moving, okay, and then we shoot another light beam perpendicular to that, well, the one that's in the direction of the Earth's movement should be impeded in some way if it's moving through space, whereas this one that's going perpendicular would not be impeded.
Why not?
Because it's not going through space. It's just going north and south. Okay? And what they found, they expected to have a 30-kilometer difference between these two light beams. There was no difference. So the natural interpretation, and even Einstein admits this, Mach admits this, Born admits this, the natural interpretation is that the Earth isn't moving. So how do we get out of that? Well, you invent special relativity. And now you say, well, the reason that light beam wasn't affected when it went toward the motion of the Earth is because the apparatus shortened.
Huh?
Yeah, Michelson's apparatus shortened as it was going with the Earth in its orbit around the sun.
Wait, you're telling me that the contraction of mass
Yes.
was invented to explain away the results of the Michelson-Morley experiment?
Yes, and that's what my book will tell you, and it's been admitted by all the scientists.
Well, isn't there any experimental confirmation that as you approach the speed of light, there's a contraction effect? The impression is that there's all kinds of experimental confirmation.
That was invented. There's no proof to it.
Really?
Yes, all the physicists will tell you there's no proof to
Not that
it.
I'm surprised, you understand.
Yeah.
I know what the scientific community is capable of in terms of mass deception. Evolution is a mass deception. But I wasn't aware that they don't really have any even purported scientific confirmation in terms of physical measurement.
No, nobody
of the contraction effect.
Nobody measured a contraction. But they put it into a mathematical formula called the Lorentz transform, and it's probably the most famous equation used in physics today.
Does anyone expressly admit that, hey, we had to come up with this contraction effect because otherwise we're stuck with a motionless
Yes,
Earth?
the very guy who invented it.
Tell me what he
Lorentz.
admitted.
Heinrich Lorentz says, I don't have any other explanation to this experiment of Michelson-Morley unless I contract the apparatus. Otherwise, we're going to have to believe the Earth is standing still in space.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But what they're completely failing to take into consideration is all the other motions that are in play here that are considerably faster than the 1,038 mile per hour rotation. For example, the 66,000 or 67,000 mile per hour velocity around the sun around the Milky Way around the Great Attractor. In other words, all of these things are well within the sensitivity thresholds of these ring laser gyros, and yet the only thing they measure is the 15 degrees per hour rotation. And that does change, by the way, by the latitude.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is no other motion is detected. And that, of course, is the one thing that the mainstream and all these people saying, oh, well, these fiber optic gyros and these ring laser gyros are conclusively measuring the rotation of the Earth, wrong again. It is not what's happening, because there would be several other velocities in there that would heavily skew those readings because of the velocities involved being highly, well into the threshold of detectability of the ring laser gyro. So the conclusion of all this is that a lot of you remember Mark Sargent talking, reading the letter from the pilot that was talking about how the ADIRO alignment calibration module unit had failed, and then he was told by air traffic control to essentially just go ahead and take off, and since he wasn't going out of radar range anywhere, that he could just check in and make manual adjustments manually. Well, to the pilot's surprise, there were never any adjustments to be made. It was always right on the money. And of course, the reason for that is because, again, it was not having to compensate for rotation of the Earth, but rather the heavens above. Therefore, it really didn't affect what was going on inside the cockpit. But all I wanted to do was point out that it is quite impossible that we would only be detecting one rotation of axis with the fiber optic or ring laser gyros when we have several other velocities going on.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
In other words, whenever you have an electromagnetic rotation, you also have what's called a dielectric rotation. And the dielectric rotation is always at 90-degree perpendicular axis from every single point from the EM field itself. So you have this toroidal EM field, and no matter where you take a measurement or a sample of it, there will always be a 90-degree dielectric rotation. This is called counter space, okay? Where the sun is actually drawing its energy from is this counterspatial dielectric field. And remember what I told you guys about magnetic fields. All magnetic fields also have a dielectric component to them as well as an electrical component. We know that when a magnetic field cuts across a conductor, it induces a current flow of electricity. Conversely, there's also this dielectric field, which is the ether, which is the counterspatial force that's there. So we said, okay, so let's see if we can influence this alleged rotation of the Earth or the sky or whatever. And so we devised this experiment with this Helmholtz coil, with the idea being that if we can generate a magnetic field, we also know that that's going to affect the dielectric field as well. In fact, if we get enough power behind it and get it in close enough proximity, it will absolutely interfere with the dielectric or etheric field that the light itself is propagating through from the fiber optic gyro. So Rick built it, we hooked it up, fired it up, and lo and behold, as soon as we turned that Helmholtz coil on, the readings of 15 degrees per hour just went to heck. It just completely screwed with it. Well, that's a problem, because if we are able to affect it magnetically / dielectrically, then that tells us that it's not the motion of the Earth that's simply causing the phase change in the light, right? It's actually the dielectric field that we are influencing.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Brian's the master gunner.
Yes, Brian. Glad to meet you, sir.
Yes.
Hey, Brian.
Hello.
So, Brian, how long did you guys train to account for the Coriolis effect when you were learning to shoot?
Never.
Never? That means never. Why not, Brian? If the Earth's rotating, then wouldn't you have to take that into account? Wouldn't that affect, or what were you shooting?
120 and below.
Okay, so what's the max distance on those things?
Pretty far.
Would you say farther than your standard or average rifle bullet?
Oh yeah, several miles.
Okay, so see, this doesn't make sense. We get all these documents about we have to take the Coriolis effect into account for ballistic missiles and ballistics. But none of our actual field manuals, which are very hard to get a hold of, the actual training manuals, ever mention this, and none of the soldiers or people we talked to ever.
They
mention
do. Wait,
this.
I got to correct you on that. There is a Coriolis effect supposedly in the training manuals, and I've seen them. Just never used them. Never had to use them.
So you actually seen them in a real manual, not made for public release, not labeled top secret, then made.
It's called a firing table. It's called a firing table. Yeah.
Okay.
Table. There is supposedly in there, but we never used it ever.
Were you told not to use it?
No. Just never.
Isn't that because it doesn't? You don't have to start accounting for it until they say over 1,000 yards or whatever, right?
No, I mean no. I shoot a lot further. I shoot further than that.
Or not?
It's kind of like if you ask a geodetic surveyor when does he use the math for the curvature. They know it, but they've never used it. It's one of those things they're taught, but they've never actually used it.
So this,
you know what I'm saying?
Does this table take into account for different places? Like maybe if you're stationed you know, in South Australia, the spin rate of the Earth is far different than, say, if you're stationed in Texas.
It does and it doesn't. See, the problem I've had with it is it takes in latitude of where you are in longitude, but it doesn't take in effect which way you're firing, which would technically that would you'd have to know which direction you're firing, no matter which way you are, because east and west would be exact opposites reaction.
Right. So then that's actually in manuals.
There is a calculation in manuals that you can find, but ironically, it's not used. Here's my quick question, real quick. What is this hangout? What am I in? What did you all draw me in?
I don't know. I think it was Candy's idea.
Well, it's fine. I'm just
glad you answered that. Well, you answered a great question.
This is the roast of Brian Burton. Didn't you hear?
Yeah, he's here.
Oh, I don't give a shit. You roast me all you want. I don't care. I'm just curious. Here's the thing, okay? There is calculations in the manuals and all that. However, it's just like my tanks. In the tanks, they have computers that calculate all this shit, supposedly. We got gyros and everything else, okay? However, when, for lack of better words, I don't know if we're live or not, when shit hits the fan, I have manual ways of doing things, and nowhere do I put in where I am on the planet, as they call it, or which direction, or Coriolis effect, or anything else. Nowhere do I ever do that in manual calculation. There is a formula to do it, but never had to do it, and I've never missed, so I'm not too worried about it. So no, I do not. Those stories of snipers taking effect and all that never happened. And I've known snipers, and they've never done it either.
So these are your YouTube Gunworks type snipers that shoot tin cans out in the backyard.
Okay, I'm talking about military grade snipers that actually shoot.
So the military grade snipers do not take into account the Coriolis effect.
I've never met one to actually do it.
I was talking to a Marine on Saturday at the meetup with Jaron in Palmdale. And he's still does he's an instructor, and he's still not for the military anymore, but just private.
Right.
And we were talking about like the Coriolis and the curve of the Earth and spin of the Earth and all that, and he was just it's a bunch of crap.
It is. It's a bunch of crap.
So then, if that is in your manual, Brian, then do they explain in the manual how an aircraft would be able to land again if they have given you calculations for the Coriolis effect and ballistic firing?
No, see, here's the funny thing. They don't really explain. So when I calculate where, excuse the animals, when I calculate where a round goes, they give us this formula, and there is a spot to put, quote, your latitude, longitude, but when you do the math and all that, it's irrelevant. It's almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
There was no difference. So the natural interpretation, and even Einstein admits this, Mach admits this, Born admits this, the natural interpretation is that the Earth isn't moving. So how do we get out of that? Well, you invent special relativity.
It's a dummy equation.
Called the Lorentz transform, and it's probably the most famous equation used in physics today.
It's a dummy equation.
Does anyone expressly admit that, hey, we had to come up with this contraction effect because otherwise we're stuck with a motionless
Yes,
Earth?
the very guy who invented it.
They don't tell you that. They just, this is what you do, and this is what we do, and we do go through this stuff. But you never take effect of where you are on the, I'm going to have to use global terms, sorry, where you are on the planet and which direction you're facing and how high up you are, and the calculations aren't there. It's almost a dummy equation in there. You don't need it. You really don't. I've never had to use it and never had a problem.
Okay. Well, that is interesting, Brian. I appreciate you sharing that with us. You know, and that's my thing. If those calculations were needed, then my thing is airplanes would also be affected. And
exactly. Airplanes would need it. Helicopter, balloons, all kinds of things.
And there's no way a helicopter, airplane, or balloon is going to land on something that can spin much faster than what it's rated to fly.
And also, you got to figure too. Think about a guy on the ground. there is no way he can calculate or have the instrumentation, not only to figure out where he is exactly, but which direction he's firing, and to do the calculation for how fast it's turning. And that's a heck of a math problem. Maybe a computer could do it, but a guy on the ground, nah.
So, have you been in combat situations before?
Yes.
And so, when you're in combat situations, isn't reaction time important?
Yeah, if you don't react, you die. It's pretty simple.
Okay, so you probably wouldn't have the 10 minutes or so to sit there and figure all that out, would you?
No. No, our manual, the way I fire my tank manually and all that, no, we set everything up prior for a manual shooting. But like I said, once I go to manual, there's no where I am on the planet. There is no which direction I'm firing. Is it going north, east, west for the spin or anything? It's not there. None of it's there.
And you've never had issues, no matter where you're at,
Nope.
not calculating the Coriolis effect.
Never.
Tell me what
Heinrich
tell me what he
Lorentz.
admitted.
Heinrich Lorentz says, I don't have any other explanation to this experiment of Michael Somorley unless I can track the apparatus. Otherwise, we're going to have to believe the Earth is standing still in space.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's one of those things they're taught, but they've never actually used it.
Huh?
Yeah. Michelson's apparatus shorted.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Huh?
And you've never had issues, no matter where you're at,
Nope.
not calculating the Coriolis effect.
Never.
Huh?
But what they're completely failing to take into consideration is all the other motions that are in play here that are considerably faster.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. Michelson's apparatus shorted.
In fact, no experiment ever has shown that the Earth moves.
Huh?